First, to thank Andrea and Sylvia and the foundation to have invited me to this very exciting day, because I am involved I've been involved since many years in multidisciplinary conversation, especially in the International Academy of Sex Research, and this is the most difficult and exciting, because it is difficult, exercise, because we hear people, we don't speak the same language. We all speak about the same thing, but we use different languages. And as a social scientist, language is one of the most principal material that I am using. Some people, they use numbers, as data. I use words and texts as data to understand what we say and what is the evolution of things. So we can consider that nowadays health and human rights have become the major regime of truth, to speak like Michel Foucault, which means that since once upon a time religion was an important regime of truth of sex, it still exists, but there is an emergence, the last 45 years, of health and more recently human rights as a discourse in which sexuality is grounded. And there is also something interesting, it's the emergence with the proximity of sexuality and human rights of a new discourse in sexual rights. So one of the questions is, are sexual rights human rights? And the other question is there a contradiction or a complementarity between human rights and medicine? Because we know that in history, medicine has been accused of doing wrong things, and the Nuremberg process was trials from which started the ethical codes. So we have on one side difficult aspect of medicine, non-ethical practices, but at the same time, medicine is progress for life, and health. So this is a contradiction in which this talk will be about. So this question, are the product of history and social construction. These ideas and documents are supported, created, and disseminated by social actors, organization, and conceptual apparatus. And they are elaborated in different historical and political concepts, which means sexual rights. Some kind of sexual rights may be acceptable in some places and not in other places. We have some current ideas about sexuality, and these ideas have become taken for granted for most of us in this room, and maybe for the younger people, they may have the impression that it has always been like that, that sex is good for health and will enhance the quality of life. When we see, for example, a discourse of Luca Incroci about cancer, about a few years ago, we did not even in the cities it started, the interest of the sexual life of people surviving and living with cancer. But before, there is almost no literature. We have the idea also that sexual health will enhance the general health of people, that chronic disease decrease the possibility for a good sexual life, and then we need to do some intervention, that sexuality enhance life expectancy. And we have now data giving evidence, epidemiological and demographic data giving evidence that when the old people have sex, they live longer and better, which was, we did not know about that until recently, because in the surveys, the population surveys that were made in the 90s, the maximum age range was 59 in the US and 69 years old in Europe. So until that time, until recently, we didn't have data about the sexuality of people after 69 years old. And we know also from this survey that one of the most important dimensions of the so-called sexual revolution is the increase of the sexual expectancy after 50 years old. Before the 70s, about 2/3 of women after 50s did not have sex, which is not the case anymore. So 50 years is the age in which you become to be considered as as a senior, as an old person. So, which seems give evidence that things have changed. We have also the idea that sexual health is part of well-being, and know that sexual health is a human right. We have what I would call that the sexual optimism, which started in the mid-60s, when medicine changed its point of view with the dissemination of oral contraception, when legal in some countries started to make possible legal abortion, and when Masters and Johnson elaborated a psychophysiological theory of orgasm. So this is the nucleus of the new sexual freedom. And then we see that in the mid-70s and in the 60s, sexuality and the struggle for sexual liberation was considered as a dimension of social emancipation. And now we can see that the result of this struggle for emancipation is that sexuality and sexual health has become a human right, which is not exactly the same perspective, because we don't speak anymore of social emancipation related to sexuality. The idea of sexual rights, even if it was not called like that, started in Europe, at least with the World League for Sexual Reform program, and this league stopped its activity in 1933 with the upcoming of fascism and Nazism in Central Europe. And we can see the list of aspects which were included in the sexual social emancipation, which means that the possibility for divorce, the equal rights for women, birth control, eugenics, which has disappeared as a human right now, the possibility for the people to get married even if they are what they called intermediate sexual types, which was a way of speaking about homosexuals, transgender, and people with sexual dysmorphia, sexual development disorder, the possibility for women to have children outside marriage, the protection of prostitution and venereal disease, and the question, and this is very interesting because when you read that now, the point number 8, the conception of aberration of sexual desire, not as criminal, sinful, or vicious, but as more or less pathological phenomenon. It is important to know that, to observe that at the end of the 19th century, homosexuality in Europe was considered as a crime, and gay men, homosexual men, were put in jail. And the idea of the sexologist, in particular Magnus Hirschfeld, of that time, was to consider that homosexuality was a disease, and a mental disease, so that you don't put in jail a sick person. You treat the sick person. And it was a way of protecting gay men, especially, against going to jail. But we know that in the 70s, in 1973, the American Psychiatric Association, under the struggle of the gay liberation movement and the sexual revolution, excluded homosexuality from the list of mental disorders. And we see that at some point, the medicalization of a condition, of a lifestyle, can appear as a protection and as a progress, and 80 years later, it becomes a system of oppression. So we learn that things, have a life and development and a death. And then there is also the end is the question of sexual education. This was written in 1929, and we could use this document to evaluate the current situation of sexual life in our countries. So if we take the history of the relation between sexual health, sexuality, and human rights, we see that there are some phases. The first phase, and I will present the document later on, is the inclusion of gender and reproductive and sexual issue in the human rights of the United Nations framework, and there are a series of documents. Secondly, there is the definition of sexual health. We started in the mid-70s with the WAS and the WHO. Then there is the invention, I would call, of sexual rights in the framework of sexual and reproductive health. And then there are some recent developments which has to do more about gender issue and sexual orientation, struggle against stigmatization and oppression. If we see the inclusion of sexuality in human rights, you see that in some documents of the UN, which started in the 68, the proclamation of Tehran, it was the idea that parents have a basic human, that parents have a basic human right to determine freely and responsibly the number and the spacing of the children. This became a human right, which is the right of contraception, family planning, which was not human rights before. We have another conference in 1993, the declaration, also on human rights, and you see and there is a new dimension which enters in the field of human rights, which is the elimination of violence against women in public and private life, the elimination of all forms of sexual harassment and exploitation and trafficking in women, the elimination of gender bias in the administration of justice, and the eradication of any conflicts which may arise between the rights of women and the harmful effect of certain traditional or customary practices, cultural prejudices, and religious extremism. I want to stop just a couple of minutes in this phrase because recently in France, there is a revolt of the women in the political system denouncing the sexism on which they are the object as a parliament. And they say, stop to men to make comment about their behavior, appearance, and whatever. The other dimension is the discussion of excision and female circumcision that Yasmin is going to talk later, which is still an important aspect in some countries and which is more complicated than only the denunciation of some ritual practices. We have also in Western countries, the question of the Islamic veil, which is not a consensual approach. Some people said that those women have the right to dress the way they want, and some other people said that in a non-religious country we cannot accept religious expression in the public space. So we see that those issues remain controversial, and it's interesting from my point of view to understand the controversies which are related to those violation of the human rights. One other document in which then the question of sexuality and appear is the ICPD Program of Action of Cairo 1994, and for the first time there is the introduction of sexual life in which it is affirmed that people are able to have a satisfying and safe sexual life, which is different from family planning. Having sex for satisfaction and not to be threatened because we have sex for pleasure appeared as one of the bases of the human rights in 1994, which is about 21 years ago. And then the Conference of Women in Beijing also reaffirmed the right to reproductive life and affirmed the fundamental rights of women to have control over and decide freely and responsibly on matters related to their sexuality. This is an interesting thing also in this women conference in Beijing, is the equality between men and women, because when we speak of when you speak of reproductive rights, we often forget the reproductive rights of men, because men are also part of the reproductive process. I mean, against the idea of the Catholic religion, we want to make that it's an operation of the Holy Spirit. I mean, men exist also as actors in reproduction. So what are the reproductive rights of men, and how are they complementary with the reproductive rights of women? This is also some issues that needs to be discussed. Then the third phase is the integration of human rights is in sexual and reproductive health, and it started in '96 with the IPPF, International Planned Parenthood Federation, which is a family planning international organization, who published a first declaration of sexual rights, and we see there is a list of rights, but which has to do more with discrimination against women, a possibility to get married or not, and reproductive health. For example, and when we compare with the first declaration of the WAS, the World Association for Sexology, that was published in Hong Kong in '99, we see that the content of this declaration is different, and we see, for example, chapter number 5, the right to sexual pleasure, which is an important to sexual privacy, sexual equity, sexual expression, sexually associate freely, and then we have also the other traditional rights. But the interesting thing is the right to sexual pleasure, which is important to discuss because it is a very contested and very controversial issue, and this right will be excuse me. Yes, pardon. In the new declaration of the WAS of last year, or 2014, the right to sexual pleasure disappeared. So it must not be understood as an abandonment of the dimension of sexual pleasure. It was a product of many discussions, and I was part of the discussion to the elaboration of this declaration, because it was considered as inaudible. It could not be understood in the language of the United Nations. Because, you know, if a declaration wants to be accepted by the United Nations or the WHO, it's a discussion among hundreds, about 200 different countries who have different values, different moralities, different system of thought about sexuality, and we are not sure that the right to sexual pleasure will be consensual in 200 countries. So it was decided to make a translation of the right of sexual pleasure into the right, the number 7, which is the right to the highest attainable standard of health, including sexual health, with the possibility, not the obligation, of pleasurable, satisfying, and safe sexual experiences. So this is a translation in the language of the international organization, and to quote the French writer Jean Genet, I don't know if many of you heard about Jean Genet. Jean Genet, who was a kind of thief, hooligan, but who knew to write one of the most wonderful classical French language. When he was asked how he could do that, and he said, "Il me fallut apprendre la langue de l'ennemi," which means I had to learn the language of the enemy. You know, so we can understood this translation into the discourse of the United Nations as some people will say that it is the language of maturity, the language of realism, of political pragmatism, but of course this appears as a possibility to have this question of pleasurable sexual experience, which means the right to sexual pleasure to be discussed and possibly accepted by such organization. So we know that since the first declaration of 96 and 99, the idea of sexual rights was included in the sexual health discourse, and it started with the Pan American Health Organization in 2000, which considered that sexual rights are a necessary condition, dimension for sexual health, which is also a new step in this discussion. Human rights and are included in the definition of sexual health. There is a Montreal Declaration also, recognize, promote, ensure, and protect sexual rights for all. And you see the list of the sexual rights. The WHO also includes sexual rights and has a declaration of sexual rights. And we have no time in this presentation to discuss the differences in all those definition of sexual rights, what is in this one, what is not in the other one, etc. And we see, for example, that consensual sexual relation is an important dimension here in the WHO, which is not necessary in the other definition. And last but not least, among the recent evolution is the question of the rights in relation to sexual orientation and gender identity, which was crystallized. Someone spoke about that this morning, the crystallization in the Yogyakarta Principles Declaration about sexual orientation and gender identity, which is a milestone in the recognition of the right of alternative and independent, and people living with an independent gender identification. So the current issues about the relation between sexual health and sexual medicine and sexual rights are when human rights oppose to medical and care practice, or when human rights reinforce medical and care practices. And we see that currently the most salient dimension of the discussion has to do with transsexual and transgender issues, because we see a contradictory situation. In the 60s, when Harry Benjamin defined transsexualism, the necessity to have sexual reassignment surgery was part of the diagnosis. The demand, the quest for having surgery of sex reassignment was part of the definition of the syndrome. And we see now, in many studies, and in one of the studies that we did, that only 30% of those who are interested, who are gender independent, I would say, only a minority, about 30%, have practiced surgery. 1/3 don't know if they are going to do it, and 1/3 don't want to have genital surgery, which means that it is a problem, because on one side there is a limitation to access to this kind of surgery, because you need to have a diagnosis of a mental disorder of gender dysphoria to have access to the process in safe environment, which means safe and with reimbursement by social security system. And on the other side, for people who don't want to do the surgery, you need to have the surgery in order to have access to the change in civil status. So these are contradictory demands, because on one side we have people who would like to have the surgery but who cannot have access to it, and on the other side you have people who don't want to have sexual surgery, but will need to have it in order to have the civil status change. But these things are changing, because for example, in Argentina, or in Germany also, it seems to me, it's not necessary anymore to have a surgery in order to have a change of civil status. And recently, the European Parliament made a proposal against the discrimination of transgender and trans identity people. So we see that the issue about transsexualism, transgender issue, goes much beyond the question of the very small minority of the transsexual people, because it's really an anthropological dimension, which means that do we still consider that the sexual identity is grounded in some genitals? Do we need to have a penis to be a man? Can we be a man without a penis? Can a woman have a penis? You know, these are all the issues that are at the discussion at the moment, and which raises issues about sexual orientation. What about a man, a supposed heterosexual man, who is attracted by Brazilian travesti, and or Italian femminelli in Napoli, as you know, are women with penises. So is a heterosexual, so-called heterosexual man attracted by a woman with a penis, a heterosexual, a homosexual, or what else, like George Clooney would say? So this raises a lot of issues, and it is the discussion, the opening discussion between sexual medicine and the discourse of human rights, and we are just at the starting point of this kind of discussion, which means that there will be a complementarity between human rights and medicine, or there will be a contradiction, and human rights will try to limit the practice of and the autonomy of sexual medicine. So, to respond to the starting question, sexuality is not a human right yet, I would say yes, sexual health and not sexuality, which is not the same thing, because sexuality is, I would say, which is contradictory for the person from social sciences. I would say that sexuality is natural, which I should not be allowed to say that. But I would say sexual health is a human right, yes, but it has to be implemented and extended. Thank you.